The occupation of the Channel Islands by German forces is one of the lesser-known events of the Second World War. These small islands, located less than 30 miles off the coast of France, were home to nearly 90,000 British citizens at the outbreak of the war. In June 1940, these tranquil British islands were swept up by the German army to take their place in Hitler's Atlantic Wall. At the peak of the war, over 25,000 soldiers defended them, preparing for an invasion that never came. Living alongside British civilians resulted in a unique clash of ideals and personalities. 5 years of suspicion, betrayal, friendship, and uneasy trust followed, until starvation and isolation pushed tensions to boiling point.
And my thoughts are always the same to whoever I talk to. Everybody had their own war, and everybody's war was different.
At the outbreak of the war, the Channel Islands, Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney and other smaller islands had been enjoying rising popularity as tourist destinations. Self-governing, yet loyal to the British Crown since 1066, the islands were known for their great beauty. As in other wars, many islanders chose to join the British Armed Forces, despite being exempt from conscription. By May 1940, the German military had swept through France, driving the Allied troops from the beaches of Dunkirk. It was now only a matter of time before the German forces challenged English territory. The British, deciding they couldn't defend the islands, sent those wishing to evacuate to mainland England on the 19th of June 1940. However, many proud islanders refused to abandon their homes and stayed. On June 28th, the Germans made their move. "33 people died in the bombing raid on Guernsey's main harbour in St. Peter Port. Many more were wounded. Similar raids also took place on the larger island of Jersey, killing 11. The Germans were testing the island's defences, but what they thought were military targets were nothing more than tomato trucks. The British government had demilitarised the islands 6 days prior to the bombing raids on Jersey and Guernsey without informing the German government. Still unsure of the extent of the island's defences, the German military prepared a full invasion force named Operation Green Arrows. This proved unnecessary.
Man sollte aber auch noch erwähnen, dass die Besetzung der Inseln nur von einem einzigen Flugzeug, von der Luftwaffe geschehen ist. Da ist eine Heinkel-Maschine, eine He-111, ist gelandet und ist auf das Flughafengebäude zugerannt. Dann ist der Kommandeur oder der Gouverneur, wie er sich nannte, der ist dann herausgekommen. Die Luftwaffe hat die Insel an sich besetzt. Mit einem einzigen Flugzeug.
Guernsey was taken on that day. On July the 1st, Jersey was ordered to prominently display the white flags of surrender. Not a single shot was fired. The sheer numbers of German soldiers left little opportunity for armed resistance. As the war progressed, the military presence on the islands increased. In May 1942, a young soldier named Tony Kumpel was transferred as part of this military build-up. Tony Kumpel would have been simply another forgotten name were it not for the discovery of this book. An old fireman's training manual that Tony used as a notepad and sketchbook, it inspired a search to find out about the experience of the occupation as seen through the eyes of a regular unknown soldier. Born in the small village of Bußdorf in the Rhineland region of Germany in 1922, Tony was orphaned at an early age. His childhood years were filled with upheaval until he settled in a house on this spot in Oberstraße.
Das Wohnhaus, wo der Tony Kumpel seine Schulzeit verbracht hat und wo bei seiner Tante Gertrud praktisch gelebt hat bis zu seiner Tätigkeit in den Berufs- oder beziehungsweise als er Soldat geworden ist.
Like all the other children in the village, Tony attended the local school until he was 15.
Die Tony Kumpel, die kannte aus der Schulzeit. Wir wohnten in einem Viertel, kann man sagen, wenn man das so nennen kann, im kleinen Dorf. Und wie gesagt, wir haben immer zusammen gespielt nach der Schule. Und der Toni war immer, sagen wir, Mittelmaß. Da gibt es ja welche, das sind Rabauken. Und es sind welche, das sind ruhige Vertreter. Und der Toni war ein ruhiger Vertreter.
Und das ist der Toni Kümpel, der Kümpelsdünn.
Ja, da ist ja da.
Ja, mit der Schwester meistens zusammen mit der Margret. Aber die beiden hielten noch zusammen, der Toni und der Margret. Ne? Ja, das war ein netter Junge. Aber eine stille, ruhige Junge.
Like most young people of the time, Tony joined the Hitler Youth.
Ja, sicher, muss mir alle rein. Mit und ohne Uniform, ne? Die meisten haben keine Uniform. Aber wie gesagt, wir haben das gar nicht so als Zwang empfunden, ne? Mit der Hitlerjugend. Nicht als Zwang so empfunden. Unsere Eltern, die haben schon eher was dabei gedacht.
Ich möchte Ihnen das so sagen, durch die Propaganda, nicht, wurden wir alle ein bisschen weggemacht, nicht? Und da hat man gedacht, das ist ein Kinderspiel. Als wenn man so Räuber und Stadit spielt, so ungefähr, nicht? Wir hatten ja im Krieg gar nicht weiter das Bock gestellt durch die ganze Propaganda, nicht? Und ich weiß noch, ich habe Weihnachten 42 habe ich die Einberufung gekriegt zum Arbeitsdienst. Und da weiß ich, das werde ich in meinem Leben nie vergessen, da habe ich mich drüber gefreut. Und da hat mein Vater gesagt zu mir, du dummer Junge, und habe gleich rechts und links ein Paar gekriegt.
Tony entered military service in May 1942, aged 20. Initially serving with the 9th Battalion, he was transferred almost immediately into 319 Division, the largest military division raised during the war. The division was almost immediately posted to the Channel Islands to begin fortification work, and stayed there till the end of the war, never engaging in a single major battle.
Mach doch mal Trapp, das ist ja wohl unmöglich. Das singt ja heute rein. Direkt im Gesicht. Direkt damit. Hey, los, los. Einheiten am Bier aufstellen. Hey, Position. Soldaten, in die Reihe. Los, sonst haben wir nach vorne. Jawohl, hier läuft das vernünftig hier. Jo, und jetzt geht's los.
Wir haben runtergeguckt, das war ja etwas Steilküste und dann auf die See. Das war natürlich eine schöne Aussicht.
Und ich merke so richtig den Unterschied zwischen dem dreckigen Frankreich und den sauberen und reinlichen englischen Gebieten. Weit schweift der Blick beinahe ringsum über das Meer und bilden ein schauendes Bild der tobenden Natur.
The soldiers arrived in the islands with great pomp and show, reinforcing the fact that they were in charge. Orders were given to respect this British territory. Hitler was keen to use this model occupation as a way of showing the British people what lay in store for them if they would surrender.
Die englische Bevölkerung war überrascht, wie wir dann alle darüber kamen. Und dass die da konnten ja nicht nur eingreifen, irgendwie was machen hier. Und wir haben die Insel besetzt und das hat die Bevölkerung ohne weiteres akzeptiert. Und wir hatten im Laufe der Zeit, wie wir nur dort waren hier, zur Bevölkerung, beste Einvernehmen hier und so weiter. Wir konnten in der Stadt uns bewegen, frei bewegen, hat uns keiner irgendwie belästigt und so weiter.
And it was ordered by the general to greet the ladies with the words, "Good morning, ladies." And if there was only one lady, to say, "Good morning, madam." Usually they passed without saying a word, but the general insisted always, we have to be polite, because we were nominated as the guests of Guernsey.
The islanders were initially fearful of the invading force.
At first I didn't like it at all. It was something new, as I say, to us, and it was with a bit of fear and trepidation that one wondered what was going to happen in the future.
It's not an easy thing if a German came up and offered your child an ice cream or People were saying, oh, you know, he's trying to involve himself in Jersey life, but a lot of them did it quite naturally.
My mother and father allowed my sister and I, although we were only 10, 11, to go where we wanted to. We weren't frightened. We weren't at all.
I had to pass quite a few of their barracks on the way to school. There was always guards there. Some of them used to pull our legs and take the rifles off and see us run, see how fast we could run. And then when we were puffed out and had to stop, they'd be laughing at us.
I think the parents were the ones that were very, very worried, especially my mother. She wouldn't go out the house for a few weeks because she was so frightened. But then I think it gradually came that they were humans, although they were fitted out with their bayonets and guns and daggers and whatnot when you saw them in the street. But you gradually got used to them being around, and life generally went on as best one could.
Basically, as we went along, we got to know them and speak with them. And it was only the odd chappie here and there that was very severe with his outlook. It was almost like leading an ordinary life, really, except that you were talking to what we termed was the enemy, of course.
They were just like you and me, exactly like you and me. Yeah. They didn't want the war any more than what the English people did, not at all.
A major cause of friction on both sides was contact between local girls and soldiers.
Eine andere Sorte von Frauen, aber ich weiß es nicht. Aber wer sonst normalerweise sich da mit deutschen Soldaten direkt eingelassen hat, der hätte sich auch vielleicht mit jedem anderen eingelassen. Ich glaube nicht, ob da noch Eifersucht irgendwie da irgendwas noch ändern kann.
Also persönlich habe ich keine gekannt, aber gesehen hat man das. Und also von einigen habe ich das auch gehört. Und vor allen Dingen nachher in der Gefangenschaft. In St. Peterport, da ist auch an der einen Seite so ein Badestrand. Ne? Da habe ich da auch mal gesehen, also wie einige da mit Mädchen geflirtet haben.
All the forbidden is nice. All that you forbidden is mostly nice, yeah.
There were a few inhabitants who formed genuine friendships with their enemy, such as farmer Roy Burton and Private Rudolf Kirschner. The young Roy met Rudolf when he was grazing his commander's horse on the farm. Rudolf soon began spending most of his free time helping out Roy and his father.
He introduces me as his Guernsey brother. And to tell you the truth, without being blood brothers, we are as close as brothers can be.
In 1942, following the capture of German agents in Iran, Hitler ordered the deportation to camps in Germany of 10 islanders for every agent captured.
The deportations created a totally different atmosphere. From that time on, there was burning hate. You know, an absolute determination on the part of almost everybody to be as awkward as possible, which hadn't existed before.
Most soldiers were posted to a certain emplacement, bunker or fortress. Of these fortifications, the largest were the huge underground hospitals in both Guernsey and Jersey. Taking months to build, the hospitals saw very little use in the war. Yet for a time they were manned, the corridors echoing to the sound of the jackboot.
ich jetzt nicht, oder wie? Das ist die zweite. Schwester, runter ein Tuch!
Ja, Herr Doktor.
Schnell!
Hier,
Voll erschüttert! Innere Blutung! Halten Sie ihn gut runter! Pass auf die Beine auf!
Schnell! Vorsicht!
The amount of building that went on increased as the years went by, and basically they hadn't finished a lot of the fortifications and that, but the war ended. They were still working on tunnels and such like.
By the time D-Day arrived, the Channel Islands were as heavily defended as the entire coast of France, but were of no strategic importance. The German High Command was never able to justify this military blunder. For soldiers like Tony, however, dreaming and relaxing became a way of life. They found the time for fishing and pets, walking and swimming. Such relaxation could make the soldiers complacent, sometimes ending with tragic results. 17 men dying as a result of being stranded by the rapidly shifting tides. Yet, despite these rare occurrences, the soldiers enjoyed a tranquility not often associated with World War II. One private wrote in his memoirs, "The second place to which I was posted was Hill 100, Laguette. Laguette was an almost completed position. Taking turn on watch was part of my duties. I carried out my guard duties with great pleasure. I could enjoy the vista of Cobo Bay right up to Grand Rocks. During my guard duty, I often saw a Sunderland flying boat passing from the south, almost close enough to touch. The flying boat was never fired on. The soldiers used to jokingly call it the Morning Courier."
Tag und Nacht halt dienstbereit sein musste hier, weil man ja nie wusste hier, ob nicht doch englische Flugzeuge angreifen oder ob hier nicht landen wollen auch hier oder so Landungsversuche sind.
By night, many soldiers chose to alleviate their boredom with drink. The barracks became the setting for wild, drunken scenes.
Abends sollte eine tolle Sauferei, die sich zum Schluss in Orgien auswirkte. Erfolg war am nächsten Tag 2 Fußgänger, die sich bei dem Tanzwirbel den Fuß verknackst hatten.
With boredom an unexpected enemy, the German authorities devised activities to keep the soldiers occupied. Art and craft competitions were a particular success. Soldiers were rewarded with extra leave or cash prizes for their skill at paintings, wood carvings, and metalwork. Tony himself was an aspiring artist. These simple sketches and doodles showing a talent and desire for drawing that may have seen Tony enter these competitions.
Wisst ihr über den Beruf Bescheid? War doch auch sicher ein Maler. In der Familie bei denen waren alle ein bisschen begabt zu malen.
Alle gut malen und anstreichen.
Bei dem er aufgewachsen ist und auch dessen Bruder war so eine Art Kunstmaler. Aber bei der Familie, der aufgewachsen ist, da war ein normaler Anstreicher. Aber hat auch so Kirchen mit ausgemalt. Und so.
In der Schule, der konnte gut malen, da waren wir noch welche. Wie der alte Peter, der konnte auch gut malen. Knosjob. Aber sonst, nee. Wie gesagt, war ein normaler Schüler.
As well as drawing, Tony also seems to have been something of a dreamer. Perhaps naively yearning for some excitement, Tony handwrote a communique in his book telling of the destruction of a British submarine off the islands, signed Admiral Doberitz. No such person or event is recorded. Ultimately, it was sport that provided the best opportunity to keep the mind and body fit, both for the soldiers and the islanders.
But they did try to get people back into thought of sport, and I know they were actually football matches between German teams and Guernsey teams.
Da spielten auch zwei Zivilmannschaften, gemischte Mannschaften, Männer und Frauen. Und sowas hatte ich noch nie gehört und gesehen. Das hat uns natürlich ein bisschen amüsiert, ne? Wie die da gegeneinander gespielt haben, Männer und Frauen zusammen in einer Fußballmannschaft.
In the early days, some of the Germans had never really seen golf, and we had Germans following us around. We couldn't forbid them from walking behind us, and they were most interested. It intrigued them to see this funny English game.
Cinemas were decorated with Nazi propaganda, both inside and out. German films as well as English language films that had passed censorship were shown. Rules varied, but on most occasions, both soldiers and islanders were allowed to attend screenings together.
Nur Deutsche, und das Schöne, was in dem Kino war, nicht, da war so eine wunderbare Konzertorgel, die spielte vorher nicht mit Beleuchtung, so mit Wasser und so weiter. Das war wunderbar, das war schöner als wie der ganze Film. Weil ja die ganzen Filme, die man sah, war ja zum ersten Teil schon mal die Wochenschau, nicht?
You'd see a British Tommy, and he'd put his thumbs up, you know, on the screen, you know. And we used to, and then the German girl announcer would say, a British plane shot down, but the way she said it, you know, and we'd all jeer, you know what I mean?
Unlike the cinema, the theatre was less constrained by German propaganda. Some local writers used this artistic freedom to their advantage, parodying the island situation in their work as a form of subtle defiance. This went down very well with the local population and, unexpectedly, the censor.
Because I was producing the shows, I was the one that used to take the script to the censor. And he would not look, he'd just flick through it and then he'd take it away to read. And he would say to me, I enjoyed that. Yes, some very good reading there. And the writing is excellent. And I then knew that he understood some of the jokes, but he never put the blue pencil through it at all.
I always admire the way that the local people came out of the woodwork and showed their talent.
We had the men where the wives and the children had evacuated. We had the wives and the children that were left here, that the husbands were in the British forces. And it helped to keep people in, shall we say, a good frame of mind. It was a great education because we also had a very well-known Berlin bandmaster here that was here with the German military band, and he said the arts should have no barrier, whether it is war or peace. And I can always remember those words.
You know, whatever entertainment one puts on, it's only for one night or 1 week and that sort of thing. You can never lose the reality of losing your freedom.
The Germans kept their Alsatian dogs there for patrolling, you know. And they'd shout out, halt, halt, halt. And you'd run like mad, you were young then, you know. You'd just make a garden wall by your own, you know, and you'd barely get up the wall and there's the old Alsatians there for you, so they're at your ankles, you know what I mean. Exciting, though. Exciting stuff. Yeah. Wouldn't have missed it for the will.
From the beginning of the occupation, German rule was strict. The press was censored and curfews imposed. Disobedience was met with fines, and good behaviour was rewarded with curfew extensions. As the war progressed, military zones were established, further limiting the islanders' freedom. Sabotage or escape attempts were met with harsh consequences.
You couldn't go anywhere or do anything apart from get into trouble. And if you did, you ran the risk of your family suffering as well, you see.
With the arrival of the forced labourers and Organisation Todt, the islanders were to witness the more brutal side of the occupation.
The OTs, I always believed that they were chosen people because I can't believe that ordinary person could treat people like they were treating some of these farm workers.
I mean, they used to have a bit of hose with lead in or sand in or whatever, and they used to whack them.
Sometimes you'd see some that were so weak they could hardly stand, yet they'd knock them down until they got up to work. They just had no thought at all for human beings. I mean, you wouldn't treat an animal like some of these were being treated.
We were 4 or 5 of us in a group. We were talking, chatting like together. And there stood no teamman there. And we were sort of laughing, giggling, but like that, you know. So he must have thought that we were taking the mickey out of him, that we were talking about him. So he made a dive at us, and he grabbed one of us and hit, and it happened to be me. So I didn't fall over, but slap bang at like that. And my ear started ringing straight away, and it's never stopped. Even now at the moment, it's still ringing.
Beaten, starved, and worked to the point of exhaustion, the labourers were given the task of building fortifications and digging the vast underground tunnel network. The worst treated of all were the Russians and the Algerians, but over 100 workers from many nations lost their lives. In Jersey, an underground network of islanders sought to help the labourers by hiding them in their homes.
It was something that sort of evolved into my life rather than a sudden choice or decision, and got to know a really remarkable widow. And she had a young man living in the house who was introduced as being French. And I realized from the way he spoke English, he was not speaking English as a Frenchman speaks it. But I said nothing, but I suspected. But the next time I called at this house, she told me that he was Russian. And her words to me were, I had to do something for another mother's son. She, for her pains, finally ended up in a gas chamber in Ravensbrück, but that's another story. There were amusing incidents. We had parties. We had parties for all sorts of occasions. It was a warm evening in September, the windows were up, and quite suddenly this Russian got down on his haunches, folded his arms, and began thrusting his legs in and out and singing at the top of his voice, doing this Cossack dance as a Russian song. And I can still remember the reflex action of people turning round and slamming down the sash windows because there was a platoon of Germans walking in the street outside.
In 1942, as the tide of war began to turn, BBC radio broadcasts were banned. Also banned was the reading of propaganda newsletters in English and German dropped by the RAF. Yet some islanders were prepared to take risks to find uncensored news.
It's a little crystal set. We'd put an aerial on one and an earth on the other, and then we had to pull the handpiece out, the old founder, from the wall, put 2 pieces of wire on, like this, and then we attach the wires to the one on each of these little connections, like this. And then we play around with the cat's whisker onto the crystal stone, which was made of sulfur and copper and lead. And we'd go on the little buttons on the front, and we could hear the BBC station in Europe. The programs that was on at the time were the news naturally, and 7, 8 o'clock at night we listened to Tommy Handley with his comical radio show.
Yet it was not only the islanders who listened to the BBC. As the war entered its final stages, Many soldiers took great risks to hear the truth of their situation. Orders were given in 1942 announcing, "It is the duty of every good soldier to close his ears to the poison of enemy lies."
Nein, mir ist ein Fehler unterlaufen. Ich habe den Sender nicht wieder weggestellt. Und da kommt ein verkehrter Unteroffizier rein und der schaltet das Ding ein und hört das nicht. Ja, sage ich war da nicht dran gewesen, nicht? Ich habe vielleicht dran gestoßen durch die Vermittlung oder was, nicht? Und habe mich versucht auszureden, nicht? Und rausgerissen hat mich mein Kompaniechef. Der hat mich rausgerissen damals. Was ich sagte, der Oberleutnant Bolters. Er kam schon runter und hat auch gehorcht.
In the final few months before the liberation of the islands, both the islanders and the soldiers were starving. Some soldiers resorted to violence and theft to alleviate their hunger. In August 1944, a Guernsey man, Mr. Gian, was murdered for 2 sacks of potatoes. A memo was issued to the troops. This murder is a shameful blemish for the whole occupation force, which up to now has been seen as a disciplined unit, even by the enemy.
Aber 2 Georgier, die haben unter anderem dann nachts bei einem Bauern im Kuhstall eingebrochen und das machten die schon ein paar Nächte und haben da gemolken. Ja, und dann kamen 2 englische Inselpolizisten mit 2 deutsche Feldgendarmen, Feldpolizisten. Die haben sich dann mal im Kuhstall da versteckt. Und dann kommen die wieder an durch das Fenster und wollen da einsteigen. Einer davon war drin, einer steht draußen. Und dann geht das Licht an, Hände hoch, und wollten den jetzt eben kassieren, den Einbrecher. Da fängt der draußen steht, der schießt sofort drauf los, um seinen Kumpel den Rücken zu decken. Und dann konnten beide wieder der eine auch wieder durchs Fenster flüchten. Schlimm, dann wurde dieser Georgier standrechtlich erschossen.
In the final 3 months, Graf von Schmettau, island commander for 4.5 years, was replaced by Vice Admiral Friedrich Hüfmeier, a notoriously extreme supporter of the Nazi cause. He had an immediate impact.
Das war damals so üblich, wenn einer erwischt wurde, da kam er vor das Gericht in der Stadt, in St. Peter-Port, nicht? Und das tagte so um 8:30, 9 und um 10 Uhr wurde es schon erschossen.
A young man, not from our platoon, from other unit, stole some cabbage. And this man was took to these shooting places and shot them. Was only 18 years old.
Tony Kumpel never had to fear such extreme discipline, having been posted in the early years of the occupation. His notebook reveals far more trivial concerns. In August 1942, Tony, unaware of the regulations, broke into his emergency rations and ate some biscuits. This act, so meaningless when compared to the slaughter on the Eastern Front, concerned Tony enough that he drafted 3 versions of an apology to his commander. It's unknown whether Tony was punished for this act, but 3 months later, none of this mattered. After only 1 peaceful summer, the young pioneers of 319 Division were cast into the frozen nightmare of the Russian front. Hitler's decision to attack to the east was one of the major turning points in the war. By attacking Russia on June the 22nd, 1941, the seemingly invincible Third Reich had taken the first steps towards its own defeat. The campaign had begun with high hopes. The blitzkrieg that had stunned Europe was expected to crush their communist enemies just as swiftly. The campaign was seen as a glorious one, and young men all over Europe joined up to fight. Initially, the German army made rapid progress, with the Russian armies crumbling before them. However, with the onset of the Russian winter, the true scale of the task ahead became apparent. Ferocious fighting, appalling weather conditions, and frostbite led to casualties beyond expectation. Despite this, the German High Command continued to portray the campaign as a success. Over the months that followed, many soldiers were transferred from Russia to the islands. Their stories of the Eastern Front contrasted greatly to those of the island's press. Fear of being transferred to the Russian front crept into the ranks for the first time.
Dann kam ich zum Mittelfront. In Mittelfront sind wir gar nicht bis zur Front gekommen, da waren wir schon eingekesselt von Russen bei Novosokolniki ist das Ding. Über Weihnachten eingekesselt, haben 8 Tage, dann hat das gedauert, bis sie uns wieder rausgeschlagen haben. Aber da waren höchstens ein Drittel übergeblieben. Bis dahin habe ich noch nicht gewusst, dass es Guernsey gab. Aber wie ich da ankam, habe ich gedacht, mein Gott, nun kommst du aber doch wirklich in den Himmel, anstatt die Hölle da in Russland. Ja, und dann da wurden wir eingeteilt. Ich kam nach St. Peter in the Wood bei so einer Einheit, das war das Regiment 583. Und was ist da? Dienst machen, sonnige Tage, gutes Essen. Was konnte noch was schlimm gehen?
I think they're very grateful to be here. I think they dreaded going to... It was Russia that they were absolutely afraid of. There was one German that came back from Russia and he said that they were firing with their machine gun until they were red hot, and the Russians just kept coming and coming. He said, I don't know where they come from. He told us, he said, I can't see that we can ever wipe them out. He said, there's too many of them.
There was a depot opposite our house, and these Germans used to have to come through this particular house to get to Russia. That was their next service to Russia. And they actually hated this. And we have seen them in our gardens trying to, well, not commit suicide maybe, but injure themselves probably. But they would try falling on their heads and shoulders and arms to avoid going.
Meistens wurden die weggeschickt, die sie irgendwie nicht mochten oder die irgendwie nicht richtig spurten, die kamen zuerst weg. Ne? Also wer da irgendwie nicht richtig mitmachte oder vielleicht manchmal aufsässig war, der kam als erster weg. Ne? Das war so. Und ich habe immer versucht, bloß nicht auffallen. Ne? Und ja, und dann kam nachher die Invasion, da war sowieso Schluss, dann konnten wir nicht mehr weg.
With the war tearing Europe apart, the soldiers feared for their friends and family overseas. Letters from home provided their only solace.
Ich werde nie eine Silberhochzeit feiern können, wenn der Krieg noch lange dauert. Und auch keine richtige Hochzeit ist doch zum Bisch. Scheiße, nicht die Wort gesagt. Ruhig eins. Und nicht gemeckert. Andere Kameraden ist es ja noch viel schlechter gegangen. Habe gelesen, dass Friedrich Landträber, mein Freund und Schulkollege, auch gefallen ist. Damit hat Frau Landträber schon ihren zweiten Sohn verloren.
Es klingt sehr unwahrscheinlich, aber es ist so, dass ich zurzeit sehr gerne Posten stehe. Da ich jede Nacht in der Reihe bin, habe ich immer die schöne Gelegenheit, mit meinen Gedanken in der Heimat bei dir zu sein. Du verkörperst für mich all das, für das es sich lohnt, zu leben, zu arbeiten und zu kämpfen.
The islanders also feared for loved ones abroad. Short Red Cross messages were their only contact. With heavy bombings throughout Britain, the wait for a reply was a tense experience. With news of German defeats in Africa and Russia, the soldiers began to feel increasingly trapped.
Ich habe ja schon erzählt, dass auf einmal dieses Gedonner losging. Das konnte man ja hören bei uns. Und das hörte sich so laut an, als ob die im Norden der Insel landen würden. Und naja, die Zeit ging hin. Ich habe immer in den Himmel geguckt, ob vielleicht Fallschirmjäger da runterkommen irgendwo oder so. Nicht? Und dann kam der nächste Tag. Und dann habe ich die vielen Flugzeuge gesehen. Also da war ich echt platt. An der einen Seite von der Insel flogen sie hin mit den Lastenseglern. Das hatte man bis dahin noch nie gesehen. Nicht? Diese Lastensegler hinten dran, die wurden ja dann runtergelassen da in Frankreich. Und auf der anderen Seite kamen sie zurück. Der ganze Himmel voller Flugzeuge. Also da habe ich gedacht, jetzt ist vorbei.
With France visible from the islands, the effect on morale was mixed. The landings had given hope to the islanders, who believed the war for them would soon be over.
The War Office in London in 1944 said that to us the Channel Islands are of no strategic importance. To the Germans they are important for coastal artillery, radar and propaganda. And they confidently expected that when the Americans had captured the French coast in September 1944, the German garrison of the Channel Islands would surrender. But of course they didn't. And this is when the long, hard, cold winter of 1944-45 set in, when everybody was starving.
We thought we were going to be liberated. You know, they were getting close, and they, bit by bit, they went down the coast, and we were just left alone, no broadcast or nothing to us, you know. We did feel a little bit down, you know what I mean?
But everything was closed, and we had no entertainment from D-Day until we were liberated.
With no escape by sea or air, thousands of combat-ready soldiers found themselves cut off and helpless. Now effectively inmates guarding their own prison, they had little choice but to wait out the end of the war. Already stretched supplies began to run out. Queues for food stretched down the streets. Shop windows were bare. In December 1944, with hunger beginning to take its toll, salvation for the islanders arrived. The Red Cross, concerned that the islanders faced the threat of starvation, dispatched the SS Vega, laden with food parcels. The ship arrived in the islands on the 27th of December, amidst a swell of excitement.
Well, the atmosphere was very relieved. People, it was quite a novelty to have a bar of chocolate and powdered milk and other bits and pieces which we'd probably done without for some time.
Towards the end, we got the Red Cross parcels, which saved us really. They were very good. Smashing. First time I ever saw chocolate that I could remember was from the Red Cross parcel.
The Red Cross will not come to the aid of an occupying force, so the starving soldiers resorted to desperate measures.
Und das ganze Denken, und das ganze Gehabe war nur, wie komme ich an Lebensmittel? Da wurde dann, auf Fernsehen sind ja wir Hecken, zum Beispiel Wallhecken. Nach dem Frühling kommen ja die Frühlingsblumen, wie heißen sie? Diese auf dem Wallhecken blühen, hier hat man hier auch. Die wurden aus der Erde gezogen, nur um an die Zwiebel zu kommen, dieser, wie heißt sie noch?
Und was wir ja zuerst kriegten, das war ja nur so ein Haberschrott, die letzten Monate, möchte ich sagen, das letzte halbe Jahr. Das war so von Haberschrott, gebacken mit viel Wasser, da gab es 100 Gramm, das war so eine Scheibe. Und dann gab es so Kartoffeln, gequetschte Kartoffeln mit ein bisschen Wasser. Und was hat man dann gemacht? Dann ist man klauen gegangen auf Deutsch. Ne? Ja, mein erstes, was ich geklaut habe, das war ein schönen Braten für Weihnachten 1944. Ja, da habe ich meine Katze eingefangen.
Many soldiers died eating poisonous plants and of malnutrition. Some soldiers, usually officers, were drinking heavily. The disintegration of morale was complete. With the Führer dead and the war all but over, the High Command stubbornly refused to surrender. Ultimately, it was to be May the 9th, 1945, before the first British vessels arrived to negotiate. 11 long months since D-Day. Tony Kumpel never saw the war's end. 11 weeks after leaving the safety of the Channel Islands, Tony, aged 21, was killed in battle near the Soviet town of Shizra. Recorded as missing in action by the Red Cross, his body was never found. On May the 9th, the people of the islands filled the streets in their thousands to welcome in the British troops. Freedom was theirs once more. The scenes of emotion and joyous celebration were unlike anything the islands had experienced before. The surrender had been signed, and the starving German troops gave up their arms without a shot.
Ich bin ja damals durch das Hungern mit 88 Pfund in Gefangenschaft gegangen. Vorher war ich 140. Und das mit 18, 19 Jahren, das ist ein bisschen wenig dann, ne?
It's the Germans we felt sorry for, because they were in a terrible state, you know what I mean? And when the war ended, they brought all the Liberty ships in the bay here and parked them on the sand, you know, and opened the front door, and the tide was coming up a couple of feet. And their well was finished, their well. But not one person not sitting on the walks jeered at them, you know, nobody spat at them and nothing like that. In fact, you felt a bit sorry for them, you know, because their well was finished, wasn't it?
Defeat weighed heavily upon the minds of the German troops. Soldiers like Roy Burton's close friend, Rudolf.
Oh, he was frightened about going for the PWO. And he actually asked my mother if he could, would she allow him to stay in Guernsey to do his PWO service, you know, stint. And she said, I'm sorry, you won't be able to do that.
For those POWs who were sent away, the war was far from over.
Und dann in 1945 auf die englische Kanalinsel als Gefangener. Ich war da 3 Jahre in England bis 1948 und ich war über vier Jahre, nur wie ich aus Gefangenschaft kam, da haben meine Kinder mich groß angeguckt, das ist der Vater.
A select few soldiers were kept behind to clear the mines from the beaches and coasts of the islands. Altogether, over 100,000 mines were cleared. For the islanders, life slowly returned to normal, but the scars on the face of the island remain to this day. A true military folly, the occupation of the Channel Islands stands out as one of the more bizarre episodes of an otherwise horrific war.
The small people, is always the loser, yeah? From every war. Yeah?
For Tony Kumpel, the islands were a brief respite before he became yet another soldier lost in war's unforgiving history.
And this is autographs from German soldiers here during the war. Life is mostly froth and bubble. Two things stand at a stone. Kindness in another's trouble. Courage in your own.
They're memories now, you know. Sometimes you think about them. I'm getting on in years now. And I can't remember all the things that happened until I'm either prompted by someone or something I read. And then it floods back again.